You know, Alex, there's a specific kind of heartbreak that only happens at about 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. You've spent 3 hours laying down the most beautiful stacked dime beads on a chassis brace. It's art. You're ready to frame it. Then you hear it, that high-pitched metallic tink, and you look down to see a hairline fracture running right through the edge of your pride and joy.
That tink is the sound of your soul leaving your body, Tiger. I've seen that look on your face. It's the same expression you had when you dropped your burrito in the sawdust last month. Total devastation.
It's worse than the burrito because the burrito was my fault for being clumsy. The metal cracking, that's physics laughing at my hubris. We're talking about the heat-affected zone, the HAZ. It's that rainbow-colored ghost that haunts every weld, and if you don't respect what's happening at the molecular level, the metal will find a way to punish you for your ignorance.
People see those pretty colors, the blues and purples, and they think, oh, look, a rainbow, I'm a wizard. But you've told me before that those colors are basically the metal screaming in pain. So for those of us who aren't currently wearing a welding hood, what is actually happening in that ghost zone next to the weld?
Think of a piece of steel like a well-organized neighborhood. All the little carbon and iron atoms are tucked into their houses. Everything is stable and strong. When you strike an arc, you're basically dropping a sun on one specific street. The weld pool is where the houses literally melt and turn into a lake. But the Haas? That's the neighborhood 3 blocks over. It didn't melt, but it got hot enough to undergo a midlife crisis.
So it changed its personality without actually disappearing.
Exactly. The heat was high enough to rearrange the internal structure, the grain, but not high enough to turn it liquid. You've basically heat-treated a tiny strip of metal right next to your weld in a totally uncontrolled, chaotic way. Sometimes it becomes as brittle as a dry cracker. Other times, it becomes as soft as a cooked noodle. And neither of those is what you want when you're building something meant to hold weight.
I've seen you get really obsessive about heat soak. Is that just you making excuses to take more coffee breaks, or is there a genuine reason we can't just power through a long seam in one go?
Well, the coffee is a fringe benefit, but the real issue is that heat is like a debt you keep piling up. If I just keep dragging that torch along a 3-foot span of thin wall tubing, the heat has nowhere to go but out into the rest of the piece. The longer it stays hot, the more time those atoms have to grow into these big, lazy, coarse grains. Big grains make for weak metal. It's like the difference between a wall made of bricks and a wall made of giant, loose boulders.
So wait, if someone is sitting there thinking, I'll just turn my machine all the way up so I can move faster and get it over with, they're actually making the problem worse?
They're inviting the devil to dinner. When you crank the heat to surface of the sun levels, you're widening that HAZ. You want that zone to be as narrow and surgical as possible. I once tried to rush a stainless steel manifold for a neighbor's old truck. I was moving fast, sure, but I was pumping so much amperage into it that by the time I finished, the whole flange had warped into a bowl. I didn't weld a manifold, I welded a very expensive, very ugly piece of modern art.
I remember that. You spent 3 days trying to cold work it back into shape with a sledgehammer. Very therapeutic to watch from a distance.
My neighbors did not appreciate the percussion at 10 p.m.
Okay, let's talk metallurgy for the common person. We hear terms like martensite and austenite thrown around by the guys in the white lab coats. Do we actually need to care about the ITE sisters, or is that just for people with degrees?
You don't need a PhD, but you do need to understand that steel is a shapeshifter. When it gets hot, it turns into austenite. It's friendly, it's flexible, it's the life of the party, but how you cool it down decides who shows up the next morning. If you quench it too fast, like dropping a hot tool steel part into a bucket of water, it snaps into martensite. That guy's a jerk. He's incredibly hard, but he's brittle. If you drop a martensitic part on a concrete floor, it can shatter like glass.
Which explains why you always yell at me when I try to help by cooling your welds down with a wet rag.
I'm not just being grumpy. You're essentially shocking the metal into its most fragile state. You're creating a zone of glass right next to your weld. The weld itself might be strong, but the metal an eighth of an inch away is ready to snap the moment it feels a vibration.
So, if fast cooling is the villain, is slow cooling the hero? Can we just wrap everything in a welding blanket and go home?
Usually, yes, but even that has its traps. If you go too slow with certain alloys like high carbon steels, you can get grain growth that makes the metal feel like it's made of sand. The trick, and this is where the art comes in, is managing your inner pass temperature. That's a fancy way of saying, don't start the next bead until the last one has calmed down a bit.
See, this is what I find fascinating. You're working with these heavy industrial tools, massive amounts of electricity and gas, and yet it's as delicate as baking a souffle.
It really is. It's a game of thermal management. You're a glorified thermostat. One of the best ways to fight the haze is using chill blocks. I keep a few thick slabs of copper or aluminum around. You clamp those near your weld, and they act like a heat sponge. They suck the excess temperature out of the parent metal so fast that the haze doesn't have time to spread like a wildfire.
I've seen you use those. They look like you're trying to build a cage around your workpiece. But let's get into the oops moments. What's the most common mistake you see people making when they're trying to navigate these metallurgical waters?
Beyond the quenching with a hose disaster, it's probably ignoring the cleaning process. If you have oils, paint, or even just heavy oxidation on the surface, you're not just welding steel anymore. You're welding a mystery soup. Those contaminants get pulled into the haze and the weld pool, and they create inclusions. It's like putting a pebble in a snowball. It creates a point of weakness where a crack can start. And once a crack starts in the haze, it's like a zipper. It's hard to stop.
Speaking of aluminum, that's a whole different beast, isn't it? I've noticed the rainbow doesn't show up there. It just stays silver until it suddenly turns into a puddle on the floor.
Aluminum is a liar. It doesn't give you the visual warnings that steel does. With steel, the colors tell you a story. Straw yellow means you're okay. Dark blue means things are getting spicy. Aluminum just sits there looking bored while its internal strength is basically evaporating.
Evaporating? That sounds dramatic.
It kind of is. Most of the structural aluminum we use, like 6261T6, is heat treated at the factory. It's been carefully cooked to make it strong. When you weld it, you're essentially undoing that treatment. You're leaving a soft zone around your weld. You could have a weld bead that's stronger than the rest of the bike frame, but the metal an inch away is now as soft as a soda can.
So you're saying I could build a beautiful aluminum ladder and the rungs would just fold the second I stepped on them, even if the welds held perfectly?
Exactly. That's why in high-end aerospace or racing, they have to heat treat the entire assembly after it's welded. For us mortals in the shop, it means we have to be very careful with design. You don't put a high-stress joint right in the middle of a long, unsupported span where the has nuked the strength.
I see you using the pulse setting on your machine a lot lately. Is that just a gadget feature, or does it actually help with all this molecular drama?
It's a lifesaver for the Hayaz. It's like tapping a nail with a bunch of little hits instead of one giant swing with a sledgehammer. The machine flickers the heat between a peak and a background setting. It gives the metal a split second to breathe. It keeps the puddle moving, but prevents the surrounding material from getting so saturated with heat that it begins to warp or grain grow.
It sounds like weld-style interval training.
That's exactly what it is. High intensity, then a quick rest. Rinse and repeat. It's the only way I can weld thin stainless without the whole piece looking like it went through a trash compactor.
Okay, let's pivot. We've talked about the don'ts. If someone is out in their garage tonight, staring at a project, what are 3 things they can do to ensure their metallurgy isn't working against them?
First, think about your travel speed. If you're lingering with the enemy. Move as fast as you can while still maintaining a proper puddle. Speed is your friend when it comes to keeping that haze narrow. Second, sequence your welds. Don't start at one end of a 5-foot seam and go to the other. Do a few inches here, move to the opposite side, do a few inches there. Let the part speak to you. If it's glowing bright orange 3 inches away from your torch, walk away. Go have a snack. Let the heat dissipate. And third, cleanliness isn't just for show. Use a dedicated stainless brush for stainless and a carbon brush for carbon. Don't cross-contaminate. You'd be surprised how many metallurgical failures are actually just, I used the same brush I used on my greasy old tractor failures.
I feel personally attacked by that third point. My wire brush has seen things it can never forget.
I've seen it too, Alex. It's a crime scene.
So the big takeaway here is that welding isn't just sticking 2 things together. It's actually a temporary, high-stakes chemistry experiment.
That's it. You're the conductor of a very tiny, very hot orchestra. And the ha's? That's your percussion section. If they're too loud, they'll ruin the whole song. But if you manage them, if you respect the way the molecules react to that energy, you can build things that outlast you.
I think I'll stick to the walking away and having a snack part of the advice for now. That seems like the most professional move I can master.
It's a vital skill, Alex. One of the most important in the shop. Just maybe don't drop the burrito this time.
No promises.
At the end of the day, you're going to mess it up. You're going to
crack a weld or warp a plate, don't beat yourself up. Just cut it out, look at the grain structure, and ask yourself what the heat was doing that you didn't see. Every mistake is just a piece of the map you're drawing for the next project.
Well said. Thanks for the science lesson, Tiger. Now let's go see if that mystery metal in the corner is actually weldable or if it's just going to explode.
Only one way to find out. Grab your hood.